Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guest is the incredibly talented actress from movies like Birdman, Mandy, Oblivion, and now you can see her run a drug shipping company in the new Amazon thriller about the many tentacles of the drug market, 000. Please welcome Andrea Riseborough. Let's hear it. Hey. Thank you so much for being here. What a series. I don't know what the budget was, but it's incredible to watch something that takes place all over the world and doesn't feel like it was sort of staging all over the world in one backlot in Vancouver, but it's actually shot in all these locations.
And it really is. It really was shot all over the world. It is. It's incredible. I have actually no idea what the entire budget was either. Yeah. I don't know. It seemed to be vast. But also when we moved from New Orleans to Mexico City to Calabria in Italy to Morocco in the desert to Senegal. When you have that much of a location move, there are never enough resources. It seems like.
Does the dynamic change on set? Do you have to realign yourself, not just because you're in a new location, but you have a whole new crew, right?
In every way, certainly, yeah. I mean, we'd take our sort of core crew with us, and then we had often 2 or 3 units shooting at the same time, so sometimes we were overlapping countries as well. Oh. And then half of the crew were made up by local crew who were amazing, so in all of those places we worked with locals in every place.
When they approached you for this, what were your first thoughts? Because it's based on a book which you have read, right?
Yeah, it's based on a book which
you
I was
asked
telling
me,
you about.
Yeah, and I unfortunately had not read.
But that's okay. It's an interesting book. It's by Roberto Saviano, who's a really interesting writer because his work's somewhere between novel and journalism. Mm-hmm. And he's written a book about the cocaine trade and its many tentacles across the globe. And they then developed that into a series. He'd written a book called Gomorrah before and developed that into a series.
And they had the movie Gomorrah as well.
Yeah, a movie and then a series, exactly, yeah. And so this is their next venture, and they've adapted it, and, we follow characters through, they've placed people in this world. Yeah. So that in a narrative sense, in a fictional sense, we can imagine people moving through this actually very real world. A lot of what he writes is based on fact as far as he knows it. He does a lot of research, huge amounts of research. And he's become he has to have quite a contained life now because having written Gomorrah, there's somewhat of a price on his head. And so he now writes I think he lives on an island. And he wrote this book, 000, from that island. And then this series is an extension of that in a sense. They're very different. The book and the series are completely separate. Emma is something that we created. She was. It took a lot of people to put it together. The first thing I thought, my first thought was when I saw it and read it, I was so excited that a woman was helming this drug story, which actually seemed very authentic as well, because that happens a lot. Mm-hmm. But
what's the family business?
It's the family business, yes. But she ultimately takes control. I was really excited about that. But I guess if I had any reservations, it was the idea of spending, a really, really good portion of my life, a year and a quarter, completely interacting with men. The story is, I'm pretty much one of the only women in the story. And Emma's a really interesting character because the way she interacts with the world is, she interacts with the world as a man. She almost has an androgyny. She doesn't use her sexual currency in the same way that you might expect, or we've come to expect women do in film. Or the idea of a woman might be sexual in a film. Yeah. It was a really liberating experience to feel like the only 2 things that she wanted is, above money, above intimacy, above anything else, were power and respect. And that the momentum for that and that need, and the more that she had, the more she craved it.
Does the power come Because initially it feels as though her need or her objective is mainly to just make sure that the company is running and that this thing happens. But then through the effort to do that, she starts gaining power and needing more power along the way.
Well, from the beginning, she sort of already is holding the reins. Yeah. The thing is, and more will become clear as time goes on, but the thing is, when we come to the family, Edward Linwood, played by Gabriel Byrne, who plays my father in the series, seems to be the puppet master and pulling all of the strings, and certainly is in terms of his weight and power and respect. But the reality is, he's not as sharp as he used to be. Times have changed. He can't quite move with the trade in the way that he used to. He has a sort of cheeky twinkle in his eye the way he does business. He has a bravado, Edward, as a character. And Emma really doesn't have any of that. She cuts the wheat from the chaff. She's she's all about business. She's just trying to maintain everything, and it's difficult. Her younger brother is called Chris. He's played by Dane DeHaan, and he has a condition which means that he's been sort of seen as an invalid for most of his life. She feels so frustrated that he's occupied that space and really bought into that role, and that he feels like he can't step up and help her with the business. So yes, it's a burden in many ways, but it's also all she's ever known. They had a mother who died when they were very young, and I think when that happened, Emma just disconnected from. There's so much dissociation. She just disconnected from feelings, from vulnerability. She has no interest in being penetrable. She was a really interesting character to play, and it was in the moments that we were relocating. So I shot The Grudge in the middle of shooting this, and I also shot a film called The Kindness of Strangers in the middle of this, and that was very odd. Moving from Emma. There was almost a sense of betrayal when I went back to playing other characters. I got to feel so liberated and comfortable, just not ever caring what the fuck people thought of me, And then I sort of re-entered the world, and I did it with one character in The Kindness of Strangers, a Lona Scherfig film that we opened Berlin with, and played a very sweet, very feminine, beautiful, more somebody who would be perceived as more conventionally feminine in terms of society, and then played a mother after that in The Grudge. So it was almost addictive.
It's so interesting, and I would never disagree with you on your take on your own character. And maybe it's because I'm only 4.5 episodes into the series, but I did take Emma to be a very feminine woman who was on top of her game, but at no time, from what I saw, was she willing to really stab anybody in the back? Was she really willing to, or nor did she have to hurt anybody to do what she wanted? It all felt like she was doing the things that she had to do to make this ship run on time, so to speak. But there was never an element of her like showing off bravado, trying to show how masculine she could be. She seemed to just be being, if that makes sense.
Well, she wasn't.
Said I could be. It's your character.
Yeah, she wasn't. I mean, but it's a really interesting conversation because internally that's not how it felt. Externally, I'm a slightly framed woman. I look like elf-like. I'm sort of very, very pasty and I can look very fragile. No, from the inside, there was always a feeling of, I think playing her, I had to walk into every room thinking, fuck you.
That's how I walk into every room. Mixed success, I have to tell you. Mixed success.
But there was something, there was taking something on that was, Emma is not a man. Mm-hmm. So her idea of what it meant to not be defined by her gender seemed to be that. You know, I mean, that was where after many conversations we had an incredible director, Stefano Sollima, who directed Gomorrah and is really, really wonderful. And, you know, we talked a lot about Emma's, the way that she would bring people to her rather than travel to them. I understand that she comes across as feminine, and that's great because she is a woman.
Not overly feminine, but I never got an overcompensation from her to not be feminine.
Yeah, but inside it was happening.
Yeah.
Inside it was like, how am I going to make my 5'5" frame, 98-pound 5'5" frame mean something in this room of incredibly big Italian dudes? Yeah. And there's literally a physical, feral, very base, animalistic response that you have walking into a room of muscle like that. So I'm really glad that it came across that way, because that's what Emma was looking for. Yeah, she was looking for that. But inside it was I think she bemoans her exterior sometimes. She wants to be free of it.
I mean it as though like you didn't go too far with it to the point where it felt like an actor putting on an air of some kind, because this is still a woman. She was raised with means. She was raised from what we know in New Orleans in the South. So just because at this point in her life she's taking the reins of this company doesn't mean she wasn't potentially raised as a debutante in the South or raised with sort of Southern manners and values as a woman. But now at this point she has to establish herself. So there's going to be a slight change, but she's not going to be a completely different person.
Yes, I mean, she wasn't raised as a debutante in the South.
Not as a debutante, but
yeah, because mum died very early on, and so Edward raised both of the kids like boys.
Wrong again.
Sorry, but it's just the what we talked about, the backstory, the ideas that the writers had as we were developing all of this was that where we end up with a father and two sons. One of them happens to have a different genital makeup, but for all intents and purposes, there's something societally about them. I mean, you'll see, as you've watched Dane's performance, there's a lot of femininity and there's a gentility. He has a real fragility, and he almost, I think, is in touch with missing his dead mother more than Emma allows herself to be. Emma's kind of holding the fort down. And I don't think she takes too much time to emotionally connect with what's gone before. So, in a sense... She doesn't
have the time. He does, yeah.
She literally doesn't have the time. Yeah, she literally doesn't have the time.
You said a few minutes ago that one of your hesitations was going and being a part of this project where you were essentially going to be the only woman. And I would imagine that extended to not the entire crew, but a large portion of the crew. It's a largely Italian crew, right? Mixed with wherever you were traveling to. Last time you were here, you had been talking about a movie that you produced that was all women. I think that was Nancy.
Yeah.
Nancy, correct? There was like a female director, largely female
with
cast.
My company, yeah.
All female crew, right?
Yeah.
Were you basically going from that to this, and what was that jump like?
I'm trying to think of what the timeline was. I mean, well, actually, yes, because we'd just done. We had nominations at the Independent Spirits for that film, Nancy, and so I'd just done a sort of press tour to support that, and had been then surrounded by all of my colleagues who made that film. So we were 90% female crew, 60% women of color. I started a company called Mother Sucker in like 2012, 13, when I was really, really pissed off in a trailer one day, feeling the injustices of something that I was part of, and just thinking, Andrea, stop moaning, get up and do something about it. If you want to work in a certain environment, create it. It'd be nice to have everyone reflected in the workplace, roughly.
Can Can I ask an obvious, maybe an obvious question for you, but I think it's something that rarely gets asked when we have this conversation. Usually, we have this conversation with people who are trying to create these workplaces, and we just kind of go, "Oh, that's so great, that's so great," but we don't actually ask, "What does it feel like to try to be a creative person on a set where you are the lone woman or one of the very few women, and you look out in the vast sea of the crew and see all men, and you want to ask a question or you want to pose an idea? What does that feel like?"
I don't think I've ever said this in public before, but I'll share this one story, which is it kind of might give you an idea of sometimes what it feels like. When I was about 25, I was in a series called The Devil's Whore, which is kind of this epic, sprawling series about this woman, Angelica Fanshawe, who I played from 16 to 45. The life expectancy then was 42, so she was
made it.
she had a long life, but it went through many different stages of her life. It was 4 films in a mini series, and yada yada yada. They scheduled most of the crew were male. We had a fantastic crew. We shot it in South Africa for Oxfordshire. The natural, the natural. I mean, they're so similar. And it was the 17th century. It was about the English Civil War. And they scheduled all of the bedroom scenes on the bed set in the 1 week. So from Monday to Friday, for an entire woman's life, of all the sexual encounters she's ever had, I was in a room with a load of, mostly very nice, sweaty dudes holding equipment, having screen sex. And at the time, because it was such a great opportunity, not the screen sex, you understand, but the having a job, and that had some amazing guys in that series. Michael Fassbender plays one of my husbands. There was a great love story between those two. I had the opportunity of working with some really incredible actors. Peter Capaldi was playing Charles I. It was just like, it was wonderful. Maxine Peake was in it. A lot of heroes. At the time, I didn't say to the first AD, could we not do this all at once? I feel like I'm going home and it's weird, but tears are rolling down my cheeks in the evening. Could we not, is there a way of making this more copable? So certainly there have been experiences like that. But what I do want to say is that in the last couple of years, the industry in that way has changed so unfathomably from the inside in that particular way. So I just made a film called Louis Wain with Benedict Cumberbatch and Claire Foy and Olivia Colman. And in that film, I play Benedict's sister. We're all part of the same family. And I have many younger sisters who are all fucking brilliant actors. And some of them have never worked without an intimacy coordinator. A few of them have never had an experience where they've had to do anything physical without somebody being around and without people being represented, talked to, not just diving in, and kind of seeing what happens. And some of the girls who play those parts and some of the boys who play those parts are very, very young, young, beautiful kids who the world sort of wants a piece of. And it's so wonderful that that's changed. It's changed so vastly. It's really heartening.
Yeah, I imagine if you grow up in that industry, you grow up completely differently if you're growing up with someone asking if you're okay with something or explaining what something means for you while you're doing it, or being some sort of go-between you and some sort of cantankerous director who has to get the job done by the time the sun goes down and
Absolutely.
is like screaming and freaking out.
And that's really the last thing on everyone's mind at the time, which is understandable. It's a shit show, everyone, we're all trying to get something made, everyone's trying to hustle. But I started out in classical theatre, and I remember playing Miranda in The Tempest, and I played Miranda at her actual age. So I was 14. I think Ferdinand was like 35, and that was completely normal. There were lots of experiences like that in theatre and film. I've done less episodic stuff like this, but so in answer to your question earlier, again, when I was thinking about doing this and thinking about being around so many guys, it ended up being a really fantastic experience because I was playing a character who was not at all defined by what people consider to be her sexuality. I was just playing a character. So this turned out to be a fantastic experience in that sense. We also have an incredible producer called Gina Gardellini, who is really the brains behind many of these pieces of work. And she, in a way, she was Emma. She was the person who was keeping everything together and pulling all the strings behind the scenes. You know, the woman behind this, I believe, is Gina in many ways. And it was fantastic to watch her command so much power, sort of so silently. That was a real inspiration. I felt like toward the end that I had been playing her.
Did she notice that?
I think she blushed when, you know, I said she got very embarrassed when I told her how much it had meant to me to have her, to watch her organize something that was global. She was holding this whole thing together. It was amazing.
Do you feel like having produced Nancy and created the set and the dynamics on the set that you had imagined and hoped a set could possibly be gave you more personal power going into doing something like 000, like some kind of confidence? It's like, sure, it's going to be all men, but I know how to navigate what I want, and I know what I want in terms of my comfort on a set.
Certainly, and I think that the past feeling was that when I entered a space like that in my workplace, there were very few of me, or I didn't see many that, you know, like it's awful when you go into a workplace and you're not reflected. It makes you feel alienated. You just don't know, it's like, we're such visual creatures, and we shouldn't be, maybe, I don't know, it's a different conversation, but just to see yourself reflected is really important, whether it's on a billboard or in the workplace or whatever. So the sense used to be, oh, I'm here, and this is never going to change. And having made a film with almost all women, and that was actually, to the last dollar, powered by women, so truly a female-powered venture. Our EP was Barbara Broccoli, who owns the Bond franchise, was just, you know, it gave you some perspective. It gave me some perspective. It made me think, I'm here now, and I feel like it's very much like I should be here. And the dynamics are always going to change. There's opportunity for many different scenarios at work. It doesn't need to be more and more of the same thing. So it was definitely a release, because I stopped feeling trapped, yeah. I think.
I have to go to audience questions, but I honestly, I can't in good faith not ask you a Nicolas Cage question with you on my stage, because my film bros will knock me out if I don't do that, I think.
Right.
But I told you in the green room that I finally watched Mandy last night, and I loved it. It's as good as everyone had told me. I don't know why I waited so long, but I'm a huge Nicolas Cage fan. I have been for a long time. I just think he's an icon, and he does things on screen that nobody else can do or would imagine doing, for better or worse, depending on who you are. For me, it's always the better, to be honest. But what was it like working with him, and what made you want to work with him? Were you a fan of his style of acting?
It was amazing. Mandy's such a love story. I mean, it felt like, from the inside, it felt like such a love story. And I love that Panos Cosmatos, the filmmaker, when he created the two characters, Mandy and Red. Actually, I have a tattoo on my hand. This is so weird.
Really? Oh, wow, that's so cool. That's like barely a tattoo. It's like, how did you actually do that?
It's white.
It's a white tattoo.
I was in Iceland, and I was about to get on a plane. We just made a Black Mirror film that I made, and we wrapped, and I had like half a glass of sparkling wine. I mean, that was enough for me. Went into lightweight. Went into a tattoo parlor and was like, I asked my friend Robert, who was there with me. I was like, "Can you get your kid to write Red?" I don't know why. I have no idea. He sent a text through, and they tattooed his kid's writing on my hand. And then later on, as we were making Mandy, I showed Panos that, and I was like, "Isn't that fucking weird?" I have no idea why I did it.
That's prior to. Wow.
Yeah.
Can we get a close up of that? Is there a camera we can point to get a? Bring this guy in here. Bring the jib in. Let's see it.
It was such a revelation on set because I
right
showed
there.
it to Panos and Nick, and they were both. I was in disbelief because I hadn't even put it together. It was definitely something that I was meant to do. I feel like working. Nick he was so invested and professional and.
It's also such a strange movie because it's a beautiful, poetic movie that also toes the line of being gory and gross and hilarious and kind
Yeah.
of campy at times as well. And you really have to know that genre to know that filmmaker is going to be able to pull something like that off. Because you could, if you didn't know that, you could have been stepping into something that didn't toe the line and just went too far one way and could end up being embarrassing.
Well, I'd go as far as to say that Panos made a film outside of genre.
Yeah.
And I think, and those are the filmmakers I'm most interested in. It's difficult to put Kubrick in a box where you think it's one thing or the other. There are some things you could put somewhere, there are some things you could put somewhere else, but really they just relate to the subject matter. Sometimes it's very camp. I think Panos has that same quality. He's a very different filmmaker, but yes, it's a film about a love story between two broken people and there's a chainsaw battle. You know, and
Head crushing.
yeah, and that's also, and it's also an exploration of grief. I was telling you earlier, it's an exploration of Panos's mother and father had passed away, and it became quite clear to me early on in the film when I met his wife, who's called Andrea, who looked exactly like Mandy, who I was playing,
Right.
which was amazing. It meant an awful lot to him, that film, and I think everything he does means an awful lot to Panos.
Yeah. A couple questions from the audience. The first one's from Josh, right here.
Hello. Your performances are brilliant, and I admire your intelligence. Because the shooting scale was so vast, did you have a favorite location to shoot in, or a place that you would like to go back to when you're not working?
You know, I have been back to a few. One place that I would really love to go back to is Calabria in Italy. We were shooting exactly where it's set. We shot in Italy in a town that had had an earthquake, and I think it was 1973. Everyone had just left everything. So there were receipts from 1973. There were, you know, the things that had remained were strange. But it was sort of an abandoned town. That was fascinating. It was fascinating to be there. Senegal was just, I mean, like I could have stayed in Senegal. You know, I could have lived. It was such a total pleasure to get to. I think one of the great things about this job is that, you know, when you kind of go as a tourist somewhere or you're trying to connect, or you don't know somebody in the place that you're going, it's a very different experience. You're observing and you're detached, but the thing about being in all of these places and working with crew is that we really were working with people who lived there. You feel like a real connection to each place, and that's such a massive privilege because you get to experience it from you know, it's arduous, you're working, you don't get to laze around and kind of just look at stuff and point, but you actually, I think, it permeates on a deeper level, I think, because you work with the people who live there.
One more from Stephanie. Hi.
Hi. I'm wondering if you would be able to elaborate more about the process that it was to shape your character with all of this.
Yeah. We did our prep in New Orleans, which was great for me because you know, the family lives in New Orleans, and I got a real sense of what I thought a lot about. So they're a shipping company, right? What have they been trading in? How old are they? How long have they been trading in that? If you think about it, their history is probably very dark. It's understandable that when the Linwoods talk about, and especially I think Emma has the thickest shroud of, she would never be seen as a drug dealer. A shroud of denial is vast, thick. But to think about where they must have made their money and for how long they've been in denial of what they're exporting was very important. And I think that informed how all of us interacted as a family as well. So Emma's role really was we have no time to analyze this. We have no time to talk about this. This is how we make our money. How do you expect to keep on top if we don't do this? We're moving forward. And that turns into something else as the series goes on. That turns into, don't ever step on me. Don't ever take my power away. It turns into an entitlement.
I feel like I know exactly where that happens, and I haven't seen the outcome of that yet.
Oh, great.
I've seen where where she realizes it, but I haven't seen the outcome yet. Very excited to see that, actually.
Oh, good. Great. Yes, so all of that. So I don't know. It always kind of comes from the inside out for me. I'm not very good at putting on a limp and then figuring it out later. Do you know what I mean? It never comes the other way around. But I think that just really, thinking about that, reading a lot of New Orleans literature and about where the family were from and what they had traded, that really affected me. That was a very big part of who I wanted her to be. Is somebody who is not at all connected with what she's doing or her responsibility in it.
Andrea, I love the show. Congratulations. It premieres on Amazon on March 6th. Is that wrong?
I'm
7th?
pretty sure it's March 6th.
Okay.
If not, it's March 7th.
It's one of those days. I mean,
They're
close
very
enough.
close.
Look on the 6th. If it's there, watch it. If it's not, go back the 7th.
Go back
watch
on the
it then.
7th.
Yeah. I love your work. Thank you so much for stopping by and talking
Thanks
to
for
me
having
about
me.
it. Andrea Riseborough, everybody. Let's hear it.
Thanks very much.